Welcome to today's episode of Palek Bookkeeping Unsolved Accounting Mysteries. And today we're going to be talking about what's the difference between a bookkeeper versus an accountant. And do you need both? Do you need just one? How are they different? So those are kind of some things we're going to be talking about today. And I love this little old lady's picture of these two twins together because I think it really shows what I'm trying to imply, that bookkeepers and accountants often look the same on the outside. So how do you know the difference? And how do you know which one you need? So those are the things we're going to be discussing today. And I'm just going to show you this little flowchart that I made that talks about the tasks. And these are not exclusive tasks that bookkeepers or accountants do. Accountants do way more things than a bookkeeper does. But the imperative one that I get asked all the time, the minute I mention that I'm a bookkeeper, they say, okay, so you can do my taxes. No, I can't. I'm not qualified to do your taxes, nor do I want to do your taxes. But I can do all of your day-to-day operations, from bank reconciliations to payroll and payroll taxes, accounts payable, accounts receivable, year-end reporting. But the one thing I cannot do as a bookkeeper, which is not very common that bookkeepers would do, your income tax. So we leave that to the professionals, we'll say, okay? So you can see here on my little flow chart that the red box is really the imperative difference between a bookkeeper and accountant. So let's also kind of, talk about when is it time to hire a bookkeeper? How do you know when you actually need help? Admitting to the fact that you might need help is probably one of the hardest things to do in just about any situation. So let's talk about when do you need to hire a bookkeeper? When the DIY bookkeeping takes up more time than you can afford. So if your bookkeeping is just taking hours upon hours upon hours and you can't afford to do that. You need to subcontract that out and find a good bookkeeper that can take care of your needs, because you need time to focus on the really important things, not the day-to-day operations. So you need time to do sales and marketing and whatever it is that is being consumed by your bookkeeping time. How about this one? Your books are never up to date. Well, that's a pretty common one, let me tell you. I've had people come to me and they haven't even done their taxes from 2 years ago, and they need help getting their books up to date. And I've really found that people wait till it's too late to hire a bookkeeper. And I never turn down a challenge as a bookkeeper, but it's always an interesting task to try to catch people up. So when you find yourself that you just can't keep up and your books are never up to date, it's probably time to start looking for a bookkeeper. So one of the other big differences between accountants and bookkeepers are the hourly rate that they'll charge. Your accountant has much more education normally than your bookkeeper, and they have a lot of tax liability knowledge, and they have a lot of that knowledge that maybe your bookkeeper doesn't have. And so normally, for the day-to-day operations, bookkeepers are less expensive than accountants. Not to say that you shouldn't have your accountant do your bookkeeping, because that's great, but you'll find it less expensive to have a bookkeeper do it. At tax time, you're spending way too much time sending emails to your accountant. Oh, or maybe you're bringing the shoebox of receipts to your accountant. I will be the first to tell you that accountants do not love that, and they would prefer that you found a bookkeeper that could take care of the day-to-day operations and reporting so that by the time it gets to the accountant, it's out of the shoebox and into an accounting program like maybe QuickBooks. How about you missed out on tax write-offs because you couldn't keep track of what you were supposed to keep track of? What kind of deductions? Maybe you didn't keep track of all your receipts, and so you didn't write them down anywhere, and you have no way to report that to your accountant so that they can correctly file your income tax with the proper write-offs. Your cash flow is unpredictable. I've personally experienced this, and it's kind of scary when you just don't know where the next meal ticket's coming from, and you just don't know, can you afford to buy something? And it's not just about like how much cash you have, but being able to predict how much cash you're going to have in the future and how much you can spend on a particular item and how it's going to be at the end of the year. If you don't constantly record your transactions in some fashion, then how will you know? Cash flow is very important. Paying estimated taxes is a pain in the you-know-what. Okay, so a lot of corporations, they're tasked with paying quarterly income taxes or estimated taxes so that at the year end, they're not having to pay a huge amount. Lots and lots and lots of businesses do this. And if you aren't recording your transactions all the time and keeping your books up to date, then trying to figure out what you're supposed to pay is almost impossible. That comes back to, if it's taking up more time than you can afford, you probably need to hire a bookkeeper. Sales have increased, but your profits haven't because you're spending all your time doing bookkeeping. It's time to find one. It's time to reach out to somebody you know maybe or ask around, who's a good bookkeeper. I'll recommend myself just for fun. And how about you've had security problems with your computer? So I think it's important to know that most bookkeeping companies often have cyber insurance, so that our laptops and our own personal drives and all of our cyber space is protected. And we usually have insurance against, ransom folks that take your files ransom and all that good stuff. So it's a really good idea, to have that cyber insurance, and most bookkeeping companies normally have that. And they offer that to their clients so that you're protected, okay? So let's talk about, when do you see your return on investment? How do you figure that out? ROI can be a really moving target and sort of hard to pin down. So I really simplified it and just kind of explained it to myself in my own mind of, how could I express this to you fine folks, is let's figure out your hourly rate. How much are you worth as maybe the owner, the president, the CEO, the employee, whatever it is that you do for the company? What is your hourly rate? And then talk about how many hours you spend doing your bookkeeping. Sit down and write it down. Write it out and say, I spend, 96 hours a year just doing bookkeeping. And the thing that I have found as a bookkeeping company is that I can often do the work in half the time because I know what I'm doing and I know what I'm looking for. Where you're spending all this time trying to learn how to do it, and even when you think you've got it figured out, something changes and then you don't have time for it, or maybe you just don't want to do it anymore, right? So if you figure out your hourly rate and you times it times how many hours you spent on doing bookkeeping yourself, you could quickly come up with a dollar amount to say, this is how much this is costing me every year. I could be spending that 96 hours on marketing, business development, even coaching my employees. So many other things in other ways. We all have our own special talents. Don't get me wrong. Everybody has their own special talent, and I believe that you should let the people who are good at something do that something for you. And let's talk about bookkeepers' rate. So most bookkeepers, and I'm in Iowa, so most bookkeepers in my area are anywhere from $35 to $65 an hour. That's kind of the going rate that I've researched. And I think that, CPAs, if they're doing your bookkeeping or accountants, they're going to charge you a lot more than that, which is okay. I mean, they are going to do an outstanding, fantastic job. It's kind of convenient to have that information already with your CPA for taxes or whatever. So I get it. I totally understand it. But if you look at it this way and you say, my bookkeeper's rate times the monthly hours, so you'll notice that I did in the calculation only half of the 96 hours because I do find that it only takes me half the time that it would for you to do it. Because, again, I know what I'm doing and I know what I'm looking for. So you've already seen your return on investment almost immediately. You could see this in the first month because you know what? You're saving time. And that's probably the most important thing that we can all have is a little bit of extra time. So I hope this information was helpful to you all today, and I appreciate you staying with me through this 9-minute video or whatever it is. I look forward to hearing from you, and thank you and have a good night.